In my last video, I was out in the Forest Park branch of the Blue Line, taking a look at the CTA's ongoing project to rebuild the branch. We took a detailed look at Part A of Phase 1 of the project and all of the impacts to Blue Line service and stations. If you haven't yet seen my video on Part A of this project, I recommend you give it a watch before this video. In that video, I also indicated that the detailed travel information was soon to become irrelevant due to the fact that the project was expected to progress into Stage B within the next few days. And true to word, it did. At 10 p.m. on August 20th, the project progressed into Phase 1, Part B. In this video, we'll take a look at the changes that have occurred to services between Part A and Part B, and the ongoing construction. Part A of the project involved the closure of this relatively short section of the Blue Line between LaSalle and Illinois Medical District. When Part B started, service was restored as far as UIC-Halsted station. Racine station is the only station on the line to remain closed, and trains are still not running on the section of the line through this station. A shuttle service is being implemented similar to Part A of the project. So today, we're going to take a ride along the Blue Line, take a look at the reopened Clinton and UIC-Halsted stations, and look at the replacement bus service that's connecting passengers between the two sections of the Blue Line, as well as check up on the progress at Racine Station. Much like the previous stage of the project, service between Forest Park and Illinois Medical District is completely unaffected, as is service between O'Hare and Jackson. Between LaSalle and UIC-Halsted stations, service is seeing a rather unusual and interesting pattern due to the track layout on this part of the line. It's actually not uncommon at all for Blue Line trains to terminate at UIC-Halsted station, as during normal operations, many rush hour trips short turn here to provide much needed capacity on the more heavily used O'Hare branch. In fact, in this stage of the project, all southbound Blue Line trains from O'Hare are displaying UIC destination signs, since they already exist for this purpose. However, the construction zone begins immediately to the west of UIC-Halsted station and prevents trains from accessing Morgan Middle Track, where these terminating trains would typically turn back. As such, an alternative service pattern has had to be implemented to allow trains to change ends and return to O'Hare with as little delay as possible. To illustrate this, let's look at this graphic, which includes UIC-Halsted Station, Clinton, LaSalle, and the LaSalle Street crossover just to the east of LaSalle Station. And here's the construction zone, which blocks the middle track. Let's say that we have an O'Hare-bound train that departs UIC-Halsted on the O'Hare-bound track around the same time that a UIC-bound train is approaching LaSalle on the Forest Park-bound track. For now, that will work fine. The problem comes when this train terminates at UIC-Halsted and needs to change ends and head back to O'Hare. This train has no option but to reverse and head back, still traveling on the Forest Park-bound track. At the same time, the next UIC-bound train is reaching LaSalle on the Forest Park-bound track, but the track ahead is already occupied by a train now heading back towards O'Hare. Rather than wait for this train to clear the track, the UIC-bound train will cross over onto the O'Hare-bound track, which is now open, and will use that track to reach UIC-Halsted. Around the time that it gets there, the O'Hare-bound train will use LaSalle Street crossover to switch back to the O'Hare-bound track and continue its trip normally. When the train now at UIC-Halsted is ready to depart, it is already on the O'Hare-bound track, and the next train is free to use the Forest Park-bound track like normal, and we're right back where we started from. This creates a situation at these three stations where anytime a train passes, the tracks essentially reverse directions, and about half the time, trains will be on the wrong track, running on the left-hand side. On railroads, operating on this side is typically known as left-hand running, which is common in parts of the world, such as England, where all traffic, whether it be trains or cars, will operate like this. This actually used to be the practice of some elevator railroads in Chicago, long before the days of the CTA. However, this setup of switching back and forth between right-hand and left-hand running can create some confusing situations where you may have an O'Hare-bound train arriving on the UIC and Forest Park-bound track, while a UIC-bound train is arriving on the O'Hare-bound track. So you'll need to make sure you pay attention to the destination signs and announcements when boarding a train at LaSalle or Clinton Station. Speaking of Clinton Station, in its reopened state, the platform and mezzanine look like they've been given a modest cleaning. But overall, the station itself has received very little work as a result of the project. Personally, I find it a bit surprising that Clinton Station is still not accessible for passengers who require step-free access, given that improved station accessibility is one of the benefits of the Reconstruction project being advertised by the CTA, and is the whole reason that Racine Station is remaining closed longer so it can be reconstructed. Admittedly, the process of making stations accessible is expensive and complicated, and these problems are only further amplified at underground subway stations like Clinton. According to the CTA, the Americans with Disabilities Act does not actually require older stations to become step-free unless they're so-called key stations. The CTA also explicitly mentions that not every station rehabilitation project that they take on is going to necessarily involve adding an elevator to the station because of the additional work that still needs to be done to bring the station completely up to accessibility standards. With that said, I would argue that Clinton does play something of the role of a key station with its proximity to Union Station, and the CTA does have it as a high priority to bring step-free access to the entire system. Not at least adding an elevator to Clinton Station during this phase of the project does seem like a bit of a missed opportunity to me. As I said, the process is complicated and it's riddled with cost and funding difficulties. The CTA has a couple of pages on its website, which I'll link in the description below, for more information on elevators, step-free access, and ADA compliance of CTA stations. Here at UIC-Halsted, once again, fairly little work has occurred on the station itself. Most of the energy, it seems, has been focused on track work at this point because that was so desperately needed. UIC-Halsted Station itself is already step-free and received some rehabilitation work in the early 2000s and the mid-2010s, particularly at the Halsted and Peoria entrances. Passengers wishing to travel west of UIC-Halsted will need to get off the train here. For the most direct route, you'll want to be at the back of the train and head up the ramp from the Halsted entrance. This will be on your left if the train arrives on the Forest Park-bound track, like in normal operation, but if you're on one of those trains that arrives on the O'Hare-bound track, this will be a right-hand turn. From the Halsted entrance, free shuttle buses pick up passengers in front of the station and transport them to Illinois Medical District. At Illinois Medical District, passengers can board a train headed to Forest Park and intermediate destinations, in very much the same way as Part A of the project. Be sure to check out my last video for details on this process. The shuttle buses serve most of the same stops as they did during Part A. Westbound buses serve Harrison and Paulina, while eastbound buses serve Harrison and Ashland, both within the Illinois Medical District itself. Buses in both directions stop at Harrison and Loomis and at Harrison and Racine to serve passengers who'd otherwise use Racine Station. It's really in the area around UIC-Halsted Station that things start to change. At Morgan Street, eastbound buses turn north and stop outside the Morgan Street entrance to UIC-Halsted. From here, the buses head east on Jackson Boulevard and stop at Jackson and Peoria to serve the Peoria entrance to UIC-Halsted, something which shuttles did not do in Part A. After this, the buses turn south on Halsted and terminate at the Halsted entrance, where they'll become eastbound shuttles again, running east on Harrison. These eastbound buses stop at 900 West Harrison for the Peoria entrance and at Harrison and Morgan for the Morgan entrance before continuing east on Harrison to the remaining stops. So that's a total of 5 different bus stops, all for one station. So which one should you use? Well, if you're on a train from O'Hare and just want to get the bus to keep going towards Forest Park, you'll want to use the Halsted entrance, as I mentioned earlier, as the bus picks passengers up immediately outside of this entrance. If you're coming from Forest Park and catch the shuttle bus at Illinois Medical District, you'll want to get off at the Morgan entrance to make the most efficient transfer back onto the Blue Line towards O'Hare. The 3 remaining bus stops, I think, are going to be most useful for passengers who typically begin and end their trips at UIC-Halsted, but travel to and from destinations to the west. Passengers who typically use the Peoria Street entrance and approach from the south should use the bus stop at 900 West Harrison. Passengers who typically use the Peoria Street entrance and approach from the north should use the stop at Peoria and Jackson. Passengers who typically use the Morgan Street entrance should board eastbound buses at the curbside stop at Harrison and Morgan, but get off of westbound buses at the Morgan entrance, in both cases to avoid making a loop around the entire UIC-Halsted station complex. Passengers who need a step-free transfer to the shuttle buses and prefer not to make use of the ramps can of course use the elevator to the Peoria Street entrance and use one of the Peoria bus stops. Personally, I recommend using the 900 West Harrison stop to the south, as it's only a less than 2-minute walk from the entrance, as opposed to the Peoria and Jackson stop, which is about 3 minutes away. Now that we've thoroughly explored the shuttle busing process, let's take a look at the construction that is still going on at Racine Station. The Loomis Street entrance has barely changed in appearance, except for the fact that a graffiti tagger has unfortunately managed to do a job on the station front. Here at this end of the station, however, we can see construction work still ongoing for the tracks through Racine Station. Specifically here, work is being done on these lines underneath the track for signaling and communications equipment. And the Racine entrance is still very much not visible unless you're looking for it. And here we can see work being done on the new columns, which will support the ramp structure and station head house when construction on this entrance is completed. And that's part B of phase 1 of the Forest Park branch reconstruction. Construction in this phase is scheduled to wrap up in early October. Although most CTA media doesn't get more specific than early October, I have heard Monday, October 9th suggested as a date for the project completion. When this happens, service will be restored to normal on the Blue Line, and Racine Station will be reopened. Aside from the new station facilities, however, noticeable improvements will likely be very minimal as long as a majority of the line remains in its dilapidated state with slow zones and the like. All of this will be taken care of in phase 2 of the project, whenever that may be. Perhaps there will even be future phases of the project beyond that. Who knows? At any rate, we can be looking forward to the reopening of Racine Station within the next month or so, and I'll definitely be looking forward to what the future holds for the Forest Park branch reconstruction. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.